Welcome to the Rising Latterly podcast.
Each episode, you will learn something fascinating so you can bring big ideas to your small talk.
Your growth is our growth. Listening to these episodes, subscribing to our weekly newsletter, engaging our posts on social media, and sharing our show with your friends and family is deeply appreciated as we work hard to expand this platform. You can also visit our page at buymeacoffee.com to contribute what you think the show is worth.
To the folks who are taking this step, we can't thank you enough. Look for the link in our show notes for more details about how you can support and follow us.
And now, please enjoy this episode.
Today's guest is Dr. Lara Pence, practicing clinical psychologist, executive consultant, founder of LIGHFBOX, a new way to build self-mastery, chief mind doc at Spartan Race, co-author of the book 10 Rules for Resilience, Mental Toughness for Families. Dr. L is a wife, a mother to 2 boys, an avid runner. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for having me. I love that intro.
Yeah, no, we're super happy to be sharing space with you. I do find it really fascinating when people like yourself are able to achieve such high levels of productivity. You know, clearly you've shown a tremendous amount of work ethic and just a tremendous desire to take on new challenges. I'm curious, like going all the way back to when Dr. L was just a kid, did you have that same drive as a young person?
Yeah. Gosh, what a great question to start with. I think I had a lot of curiosity, and I think that like propelled my interest in things and my desire to explore. Both of my parents owned their own business, which was a nonprofit. They ran a film festival for 34 years. It's still alive today, but they're just not running it. And so they were always hard workers and always had multiple things going on too. Like my dad simultaneously worked at Dartmouth, and, you know, my mom was a competitive horse rider. So I sort of grew up with parents who didn't just do one thing. You know, they didn't just go to work from 8 to 5 and then they came home. It was definitely, it felt sort of multidisciplinary in our household. We integrated work, we integrated, you know, athletics and movement and sports. And then there was just a lot of curiosity. So I think it was really actually my curiosity, I would say, more than like my grind or my drive that sort of propelled my desire to dip my toe in lots of different ponds. And maybe in some ways, like my desire not to be bored. Boredom is really important. I even talk about it in the book, but it's definitely not something I love. Like, so when I find myself kind of getting bored with things that I'm doing in my life, I look for something else to sort of provide some kind of boost of creativity for myself, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think the opposite of boredom is fascination. And it sounds like you found a lot of fascination just in working with people.
Yes.
I really like one of the things you say on your website. You wrote that one of your favorite courses in graduate school was calculus. You like that it was concrete. You know, it's not like it could be either this or that. It was always one answer. And I feel like there's a lot of gray area, though, when you're working with people and in therapy, like clients may be obfuscating their problems. They may not be sort of making their complexes apparent in those first couple sessions. You kind of got to wade through a lot of gray area to really get to the heart of the matter. So do you like working? I know you like calculus, you know, you like calculus for the concrete elements of it, but do you like working with the gray area as well?
Yeah, which is so funny to think about in so many ways, because like calculus actually isn't like super concrete a lot of the time with anyone who knows calculus. But yeah, I mean, I do really enjoy the exploration and discovery and like not always knowing, which I guess we could sort of call the gray area. When I was in graduate school, I did have a difficult time that first semester with a lot of the courses that I was taking, in the sense that it always felt like we didn't land on an answer. You know, it always felt like, well, we're just not really sure. Like, this is what the data says, or this is what the clinical research trials say, but big question mark. And so I went to my faculty advisor and I literally said, like, I need a math class. Like, I need A plus B equals C. And that actually led me to get my MBA alongside my doctorate degree, which I think has sort of helped actually in a lot of ways with the different activities that I've done in my life. But I do love the unknown, in the sense of when a client comes into my office, what's most exciting to me is that I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know what we're always going to talk about. And I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know what's going to activate them towards some kind of change or exploration or self-awareness. And so it really is a bit of a game of discovery. And that to me, like, I mean, I just feel like that it's fun. For lack of a better word, like I have a good time with it. And of course, it's painful often for a lot of the clients that I work with to kind of sift through parts of their life that they don't necessarily know are impacting them in profound and unhealthy ways. But it is also really fun when we sort of get to a place where we're like, oh my gosh, like, can you believe we got here? Like we kind of peeled back this layer and uncovered this thing, or can you believe where you are right now in your life after a year of understanding yourself better and sort of seeing that accomplishment and seeing that progress. So that part is definitely something I enjoy. And then alongside that, I recognize that like I do crave at times like more concrete product and outcome, which is where sometimes then I shift my energy towards other projects or other initiatives that can sort of provide me with that. I mean, a book is a great example. It's like you write down the words and the words populate on the page, and then the pages populate into a book. It's a long process, but it's definitely, it feels sort of more methodical in that way, I think. So I like both. I sort of like the analytic and the discovery, and then I really appreciate the methodical.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, when you thought about writing this book with Joe DeSena is actually the founder and CEO of Spartan Race. He was the co-author on the book. There were 10 rules in the book, but what is sort of the driving message you were trying to get across to families and parents?
Hold on. Sorry, that was my foot that popped out my audio.
No
So it's really interesting. Joe came into my life actually at like a really serendipitous time when I wanted something just a little bit different for my career. And after sort of getting to know him initially, I wanted to get to know him a little bit better. So I read the book that he had just written at the time called Spartan Way. And after reading that book, I thought to myself, like, he needs to put what's in this book in another book, but talk about parenting and talk about child development. And I think one of my desires in wanting him to sort of, write that book was that my practice, I had over like the last 7 years of being in private practice and the last 17 of being in like the therapy space, I had really seen things go from bad to worse as it related to the struggle that I witnessed parents having with their children. And it wasn't necessarily going from bad to worse in the sense that that children were coming in with more severe depression or more severe anxiety or more severe eating disorders. But it went from bad to worse in the sense that parents seemed to grow more and more helpless over time and feel like they had less and less power over time. So to me, I really felt like we needed like an intervention. And I mean, I think one of the arenas where we can be incredibly critical of ourselves and of others is the parenting arena. And so I wanted Joe to write a book, and then Joe was basically like, I mean, I will write this book, but I need you to write it with me because you have the clinical expertise. You're on the front lines. You have these individuals who are struggling literally in your office. And I also want the credibility, so Joe kind of wanted those things. So that's how we joined forces together. But I think my main message and Joe's main message is that we really, I think in a lot of ways are parenting out of significant fear right now. And we're overprotecting children and we're pandering to children. And it's very, very confusing. I feel like parents are living oftentimes in sort of this world of abundance, not necessarily of stuff, but of availability and accessibility to things. And they're transferring that onto their children. And our children are living in a different time right now. I mean, I lived in a time where the busy signal existed, like if I called someone and they weren't available, I just waited, or if I got out of basketball practice, but, my mom or dad wasn't outside yet, I didn't call their cell phone because they didn't have one. I just waited, which provided a life skill. And I know that people listening will probably be like, okay, boomer, but it's true. I mean, when you're exposed to situations that allow you to engage in delayed gratification or patience building or distress tolerance, you build those skills. And I think our kids are having way less and less of that right now. And I think that that's creating a lot of problems.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the angle that I thought was super valuable in the book. Obviously, from a parenting perspective, for any new parent, they should absolutely be reading this book. And for parents that are struggling, they should also be reading this book because, as you allude to, I mean, kids are struggling because the parents are struggling.
That's right.
I mean, it's like a relentless pursuit of trying to keep this kid happy and like trying to make their life be as easy as possible with no real obstacles in the way. And what's happening is that the more that that's happening, the more you're realizing that our next generation of kids is just being, they're just more unprepared.
That's right.
They're not as resilient. They don't know how to deal with stressful situations. And as a result, honestly, like they don't have real high self-worth. And it kind of starts with the parents, and they're watching what the parents are doing, which I think is so powerful to think about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think I love that you sort of extrapolated that particular part, because I think one of the things that like I really found true in wanting to write this book and wanting to give parents, some kind of guide is that like it starts with you. I can tell you all the things that maybe you need to do at home, right? I'm using air quotes to help create, let's say, self-reliance in your child. But if you don't have that either, then it's going to be really difficult. And if you as a grown adult don't know how to set a boundary, you're never going to be able to set one with your children, So, and if you don't know how to take care of your body in a healthy way, your children won't know either. So I think, there's so many books out there that are on child brain development and teenage angst and, all of that. And I think for us, it was really, really important to sort of like hit two birds with one stone, in the sense that we want to be resilient adults, and you have to be a resilient parent first and foremost in order to parent through that lens. And a lot of that really, I think, first and foremost starts with self-awareness. But I think that was a really key part for us, is that like your kids are watching your every move. And so you have to live these principles and these values if you expect your children to do the same.
Yeah. And to add some context and meat to that, just there was a part of the book that I actually do want to read here. Think about this. When you snack yourself into a coma, your kids are watching. When you click the TV on at 5 p.m. and off at 11 p.m. every night, your kids are watching. When you commit to try something new, yet fail to make it through the first week, when you give up, opt out, or make excuses, what values are you demonstrating for your wife, husband, kids, friends, parents, or roommates? What could you be doing instead of sleeping through your life? I thought that was so powerful because, again, it just sets the standard of it has to be you setting the example.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one of the things that my husband struggles with, as do many adults, is his phone. Yeah. And, he carries it everywhere, and he's constantly checking and looking and checking and looking. And when our oldest, who's 11, he has a phone, but it doesn't have you can't do all the gadgets on it, like the open, I call them gadgets. I don't even know what they are. The apps on it. But he still, even he walks around, and we only let him have it whenever he's roaming around the neighborhood. Like he doesn't get it in his room. It's all the stuff that I talk about in the book. Like you have to be really regulated with that kind of stuff. But whenever he has it, even if it's for a brief moment, he's always looking at it, like picking it up and checking it and picking it up. And my husband gets on him about it. And I'm like, babe, I mean, like we got a model here, dude. You got to be able to put it down. So I think this is, again, like going back to what I said earlier, where does all of this start? I think it just starts with self-awareness, like really being, relentlessly observant of your own behavior and the language you use to talk about yourself and the language you use to talk about others, and just everything that you do on a daily basis that sends your kid a particular message.
Yeah, you used the word helpless when we first broached the subject. Why do you think parents now feel more helpless than they may have in past generations? I mean, there's always change, there's always new technologies. Why in this particular moment do you think parents are feeling a little bit out of their element? Is it just everything's changing so fast, or what's the deciding factor?
I think that that's one part. I definitely think that's one part. I think the other part is, I was just thinking about this the other day. So this is actually the first time I'm answering this question with this answer, which is that I think we're actually living in a time where our kids know more about technology than we do. And so they feel smarter about it than we do, and we lean on them, at least many of us do. Like in my experience, many adults my age, I'm around 40, lean on their 12-year-old, 13-year-old to teach them like, oh, show me the new feature on Instagram, or how do I do this? Or how do I make this widget pop up on my computer or my phone?
Mhm.
And so I think from that perspective, there's almost like this shifting of this power dynamic where the kids now have power because they know more. But and so for me, I think that creates some sense of insecurity internally within adults. I don't necessarily think they would say it out loud, like, oh, I'm insecure because my child knows more than I do,
Yeah.
But I do think that it's sort of like this odd shifting of the plates. And I think parents feel like, if my child owns their phone, it's their phone. And so who am I to take that from them? Or if they have a device, it's their device. Who am I to take that device away? So, and I see this all the time. Like I'll sit with parents and they'll say, she just won't put down her phone at dinner. And I will say, then take her phone away. And the response is, well, we can't just take her phone away.
Yeah.
And I look at them and I say with wide eyes and mouth totally dropped open, why not? Like, why can you not take her phone away? And there's never a good answer. I mean, there's never a good answer. It's never because she's paying for it and we're not. It's never that. It's never because, she needs it to live. It's never that, right? I mean, there's never a good answer. So I think that's part of it. I also think that parents are really scared right now. And I don't know. I think where this comes from is just our continued lack of tolerance for that which is difficult. And so they're picking the easy road and route of like not upsetting the child. So not setting a boundary because they would rather just not deal with the tantrum, not taking a device away during a particular time because otherwise, that their child is going to be grumpy, not saying no to the Lucky Charms in the cereal aisle because they don't want their child to throw a fit and other strangers to look, and then they're really uncomfortable. So I think we, as a society, and this is maybe even a different topic, but we're really moving away from our ability to just even tolerate like human existence and the pain that is included in that. And so I think from that perspective, we trying to minimize that as much as possible at home as well. And we don't want to hear the tantrums, and we don't want to get our kids mad at us, and we don't want them to be sad at all. We definitely don't want them to experience failure or pain. But unfortunately, as we talk about in the book, and as I see in my practice all the time, this is not building kids who have healthy coping skills and healthy coping mechanisms. So I think that's sort of part of where it's stemming from.
And add to that, I mean, it's not even about healthy coping skills. Let's just talk about health in general. I mean, I think this part of the conversation ties into a word you used earlier, which is boredom. And this is exactly when, parents might want to think about being more active with their children. I mean, just a couple of stats to share. Only 1 in 3 children are physically active. About 1 in 3 children are either overweight or obese in the United States. And new diagnosis of type 2 diabetes for the people that are aged between 10 and 19 is increasing like 5% a year. So, right, in terms of like doing what's easy and avoidant versus doing the right thing, pulling from the concept in your book, this is when you prioritize movement over screen time.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. I mean, one of the things that we do in our household is that when I sense that the kids like feel cooped up, like they're getting grumpy, or, they're starting to nitpick at each other. I've got 2 boys, an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old, right? So they're starting to like poke at each other. Immediately, the answer is go outside and play. There's a field across our street, or like we literally will say, run a lap around the block, right? Because now, and I would guess most parents in that moment, when the kids are barking at each other, when they're, being loud, when they're poking at each other and you've got something to do, most parents would say, you guys just turn on the TV and watch a show. Right. Or like, grab your iPads, fine, go upstairs, get on your Nintendos, just whatever, go, just go do something for a little bit. Right. Or go in a timeout and sit down and like stare at the wall and not move your body. Like neither of those are particularly effective. Whenever we do that with our children and we tell them to go outside, play in the field, or tell them to run around the block, they come back a different kid. They come back completely different every time. And it is a happier kid. It's a more regulated kid. It's a little bit of a tired kid, and tired kids like actually sometimes can be rather pleasant unless you get to the exhausted phase. And then that's awful. But so I think we really have to dial into that part, the movement part, and we are responsible for that. Like I saw something the other day that talked about, that because of COVID and then because of the lockdown, that the kids gained more weight last year than they've ever gained in a particular year. And I just thought to myself, like, this is not the government's fault. This is our fault as parents. I don't, political beliefs aside, you as a parent, you are the one that is choosing to not intervene when your child is sitting on the couch. You are the one that is choosing to not intervene when they grab the second bag of chips when they're watching something on Netflix. Like, that is your choice, nobody else's choice. And I think that we are offloading responsibility onto the government, onto school systems, onto other entities that, at the end of the day, the buck stops with us. Like, we've got to intervene and do a better job.
Absolutely.
I get kind of passionate about it, but you can tell that it matters to me.
Oh, absolutely. Go for it, Arjun.
No, I was going to say everything in this book matters because it is really a reflection of what's going on in society. And you mentioned responsibility, and from responsibility, we can talk about discipline. And from that, I mean, it's a whole, like you had a whole chapter on that around discipline breeds responsibility and the impact of integrity. And I just found that entire section so fascinating. Because humans crave it and kids crave discipline. And if we can incorporate that into their lives, I think it's really important. And so for anyone listening who has kids right now, I mean, actually, before we get there, I would love to get your sense on responsibility and discipline. But I also wanted to pull something from your book around like how you laid out what a 2-year-old could be doing, what a 5-year-old could be doing, what a 7-year-old could be doing. I would love to go through that after your answer around responsibility and discipline.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think kids thrive off of consistency, predictability, right? And boundaries and containment. And so one simple way to do that is to provide your child with a chore and to not let up, no matter how much of a struggle it is to get them to do that chore. For example, my children, Friday is trash day in our house. They take the trash out. They round up all the trash and all the trash bins in our house. They consolidate it. They take it out to the garage, they put it in the bins, and they drag the bins out to the street, right? We're on year 2.5 of this. We started this when I moved here. Every single time they groan and moan. Every single time. This is what, 100+ week, like Fridays of them doing this. There is yet to be a Friday where they have not said, we have to, yes. And this is where, Joe and I, you talk about like choosing your hard, right? Like this is that hard moment where it would take my husband and I a minute at most to gather all of the trash bins and consolidate them. And we'd have it out in a second. And I wouldn't have to listen to the groans and moans. And I wouldn't have to listen to them argue about which trash can they're going to pull or which trash but guess what? It matters. That discipline matters of establishing that habit and that routine and aligning with that consistency and predictability. And that breeds responsibility because now my children feel and know, no matter how much they may not like it, that they are responsible for the trash, which makes them feel like they contribute to the family. And that is critical. We have to feel like we are contributing and adding value, and they add that value. And guess what my husband and I say every time after they come back in? Thank you. Right. So that is so important. Like it is important to start to establish that responsibility of feeling like you can take care of something, like that really matters. Oftentimes parents will get a pet to test and see if their kid can take care of something. And then when the kid doesn't, what do? They take care of the pet.
Yeah, right.
Like that doesn't, we don't do that in our house. Like if you're we finally, after years of hearing about it, we finally got our youngest a pet. We got him 2 rats, which by the way are the best pets. And he cleans the cage. He does the water. And guess what? Every time I say, hey buddy, did you do the water? They don't need water today. They need water every day. Mom, do I have to? Like it's never, hey mom, that sounds like a great idea. I'll totally do it,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it breeds that responsibility. And he feels like he is taking care of the things that he asked for, that he earned. And now he needs to continue to earn the right for them to be there and show the responsibility. So hopefully that answers your question. That was like a super long-winded answer, but I think that's where discipline and responsibility tie together.
Absolutely. And then the other thing is like, it's creating memories and it's creating stories.
Yes.
And so, yeah, there might be some like pain, but at the end of the day, like you guys are a family. You guys.
Exactly.
Like,
I love that
communication,
Yeah, I love that point.
Yeah. And so just to wrap that part up, sorry, Jay, I was just going to say like from the book, here's a guide to help, in terms of choosing activities. A 2 to 3 year old can put toys away, dress themselves, and help put clean dishes away. Yep. A 4 to 5 year old can feed pets, make their beds, even if it's not perfect, and help clear the table after dinner. A 5 to 7 year old can wipe tables, they can put laundry away, and they can vacuum floors. An 8 to 9 year old can load and unload the dishwasher, help prepare meals, and make their own lunch. A 10 to 11 year old can change their bedding, clean the kitchen, and mow the lawn. And someone who's 12 years old or older, they can wash the car, they can babysit, they can go grocery shopping with a list. And so that's a little guide that I think is useful for people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would just tack on to that for the parents that are listening. They're like, all right, I'm going to start that. It's not going to go well. Like, it's not going to go well immediately. You're not going to have a child that's like, oh my gosh, I'm so thrilled that I have to clear the table because I've been going upstairs and just playing Legos and that just hasn't been stimulating enough. So I'm so thrilled to now clean. They're not going to say that, right? They're going to, like I've demonstrated, like I've talked about, they're going to whine and complain, but it's not your job to keep them from complaining. It's your job to build children that are reliant and resilient. And so like Joe ran this kids' death rates once. It was like a camp at his farm and he took a bunch of kids there and, put them through a couple of days of not fun activities. And he called me halfway during it. And he said, I don't understand how I can get these kids to stop complaining. They are complaining about everything that I am asking them to do. And I said, Joe, it's not your job to get them to stop complaining. It's just your job to get them to do the work. They're going to want to complain because they don't have a brain that's fully formed. And so immediately when they are presented with a stimulus that they see as a threat because it's going to cause them pain or it's going to cause them boredom or they're not going to want to do it, their immediate response is to complain because typically the complaining gets them out of that threat, right? Mm-hmm. So don't try and get them to not complain. Just keep doing it anyway and intervene with the parents. Like if the parents are like, oh my gosh, my kid is complaining and I need to pick them up. It's the parents that need the intervention. It's not the kids. Don't expect them to have a smile on their face, but expect them to continue and do the work.
Yeah. It's delayed gratification for the kid.
Yes.
They're not going to see the reward for a while, but it's also delayed gratification for the parent as well. Like, totally. You're not going to see that really pay off until maybe adulthood, where that sense of resilience and that sense of responsibility is ingrained in them and it manifests in them being more, productive, healthy adults. So yeah, it's a really interesting point that it's going to be difficult and there are going to be growing pains, but it's better than the alternative, which is not building that backbone at all.
Yep, absolutely. And you will see glimmers of where they enjoy or where they either enjoy doing it or know that it's building a sense of character. Like you'll see little glimmers of that if you look hard enough. But don't be confused by the complaining. The complaining is really normal. And not every, I'm sure that parents won't love that I'm going to say this, but not every complaint is a complaint worth listening to, so, let them complain and then keep encouraging them to do their job.
Yeah.
Because you find that in the adult world, right? I mean, don't you guys find that in your work? Like, not every time you raise your hand and say, hey, I'm not okay with this, does somebody say, oh, you're not? Okay, let's change it. You know, I know that in my life, it doesn't work like that. Like if I feel like there's something going on in one of the projects that I'm invested in that I don't love, and I raise my hand and I'm like, I don't like the way we're doing this. Well, we're going to do it that way.
Right.
You know, so it's in the adult world, it doesn't work like that either. And we're preparing them for the adult world.
Yeah. And you are not omnipotent in the adult world. I think with the phone, part of the benefit is like you have complete control. You can go anywhere you want on the internet, take command of any app. It's this whole digital realm where you are kind of the god of that little space. And maybe that's part of why it's so dear to both adults and kids. And in the real world, we're actually up against other people with their own motivations that are often in conflict with yours. You are not the god of that environment.
That's a great point. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things, kind of going towards your work with your clients in your role as a clinical psychologist, one of the things I really like about the way you describe yourself is you call yourself an active therapist. And we actually, in this past week's episode with personal and business coach Bill Small, we talked about the need to unite mindfulness with action. Like, you know, you can observe what you're doing, you can learn to respond to it and not react to it. But at the end of the day, that response needs to happen. Like the being needs to be united with the doing. And it sounds like that's the kind of work that you're pushing your clients towards. Like, it's not just about getting to the heart of a matter intellectually. It's about actually finding that action that's going to push their life in a better direction.
Yeah, 100%. You hit the nail on the head with that one. I mean, I think to me, you know, one of the things that I've definitely learned over time in my practice, and I think people get really confused by motivation. They feel like motivation comes first and then comes momentum, right? If I'm motivated, then I'll start to do whatever work is necessary, start to get more fit, start to change my relationship with food, start to change my relationship with any other stimulus, alcohol, drugs, start to change my relationship with a person. And I think it's the opposite. Like you have to get moving first. And then you start to build motivation to continue to keep going. And I think we can get really stuck. I mean, in analysis paralysis in and of itself, you know, just like let's explore this and let's pick it apart as much as possible before we actually do anything. But we have to start doing things to literally begin to rewire our brain. I mean, it is through the action that we begin to do that. And so, yeah, with my clients, it's really important for me to be able to work with them collaboratively on what that looks like and be curious about it with them. And listen, the truth is that, again, kind of going back to a word that I used in the very beginning, it's an exploration sometimes. I don't always have the answer of what's going to kind of work and what's not going to work. And so a lot of it is experimenting and testing. But I think through that experimentation and testing, we also gather more data on the individual themselves and on what they like and what they don't and what's working well and what's not working well and who they are and who they're not. And so, but I think all of that really starts with some kind of movement and some kind of action for sure.
And then when you start to see results, I mean, that's what keeps you going too.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I imagine there might be some moaning and groaning too if you're trying to encourage your client to do something that they really don't want to do.
For sure. And I think, you know, and there is that, like, you know, I'll see client on Monday. They'll come back next Monday and they'll be like, well, I tried that thing that you recommended. And I'll say, oh, how'd it go? And they're like, yeah, it didn't go well. I didn't like doing it. Okay. Was it helpful? Not really. Okay, let's do it again. You know, it's like, it doesn't just stop there. I mean, we get to places, like if you think about it, many people who have, you know, for example, the narrative or the story that they're not good enough at something. That's a story and a narrative that they've been telling themselves over and over and over again, multiple times a day for multiple years on end, right? Going and doing one journal exercise is not going to change that narrative. Yeah. It needs to be consistent over and over and over again. It doesn't necessarily, if you've been telling yourself that story for 20 years, you don't necessarily need an additional 20 to undo that story, right? But you definitely need repetition and you need consistency, because that repetition and consistency is what got you there in the first place. So the only way that you're going to undo it is by the same repetition and consistency, but just through a different mechanism and with a new narrative.
So this idea of like not being good enough, I think obviously that's a feeling that a lot of people have. So my question really is like, if adults are struggling with that feeling, then how do you expect them to then have conversations with their kids who might have mixed feelings about something? Like, like how do you have the conversation with a kid that it's okay to have like feelings where they feel like they're in growth mode, and then there's going to be months where they feel like they're in a fixed mindset? Like, how do you balance that conversation as an adult or a parent with your child?
It's a great question. And I feel like you even answered it as you were asking the question, which is allowing yourself to have that conversation with the child and knowing that, like, listen, we are human beings are flawed. Human beings are complex. Human beings are complicated. Human beings are meant to experience pain, discomfort. Human beings are meant to go through struggle and difficult things. And there are times for sure when, for example, I don't feel good enough. Yeah, absolutely. And so when my kid comes to me, which he has, and said, like, I don't feel like I'm doing well enough at school, right? It's like, okay, well, buddy, let's talk about that. And so it's providing that safe space, right? So it's not immediately saying like, what do you mean you're not doing good at school?
Yeah.
You're doing so good at school, because that right there, right off the bat,
Sugarcoating.
right there is about invalidation and annoying, and
Uh-huh.
then, but also, so it's providing that safe place, like, okay, bud, let's talk about it for a little bit. And then it's also like providing a little bit of a feedback loop of, you're human. Like, I see you, because I know what that feels like, buddy. I get it. Like, there are times when I'm at work and I'll be really, really struggling with a client, and I'm like, gosh, I'm just not good enough at this. Like, I just need to be better, and then so then, well, mom, what do you do? Like, let's say that came out of their mouth. It's like, well, I have to keep telling myself, gosh, you know what? You've helped so many people. You really are good at this. I start to do some reality testing, and I start to remember that, like, at the end of the day, sometimes it's just not my job to fix people. So sometimes at the end of the day, it's just not your job to get an A. Like, maybe that's just not your job at school right now. So I think a lot of it is conversation, but I think a lot of it is also common humanity, in the sense that, like, we want to normalize certain things and for our kids, so that they understand that, they can feel that way and still be completely lovable, and also still function just fine. Sometimes they just need to tolerate it. Sometimes they need to find a new narrative. Sometimes they need to find something else to do to help distract them from that thought or from that feeling, because, they're kids and they're not necessarily going to sit there like we are and analyze it to death. Does that make sense?
That's great insight. And I think I can quickly pull two threads off of that, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You mentioned like getting an A and normalizing things and making the child feel like they're still loved. Well, that's primarily the reason why parents should consider not only putting the A+ on the refrigerator, but the C- on the refrigerator, because
Yes.
with that C-, there's an opportunity for growth. And there's an opportunity for that child to feel like they're not judged based off of what they're getting in school. They're still loved. They know that their parents are there to support them in terms of like, hey, we're going to put the A+ up and the C- up, but in that C-, let's talk about where you can have done things better.
Totally.
And there's like this opportunity for a really enriching conversation, I think, between parents and kids on that. So that's one thread.
I love that.
And then the other thread I was just thinking about, it's like, so what happens when your kid comes to you and they say that they want to do something where it might be a shock for you to hear that at first, and then you have to protect your projections and make it seem like it's not the hardest thing in the world. And then you kind of encourage your child to like take on that big task. But then what happens when you start to notice that they kind of lose interest in the thing that they just had interest in like a week ago? Like, how do you nudge them? Do you even nudge them?
I think
Because
so.
then you don't want to teach them quitting, is my point. Like, you don't want to teach them quitting.
Yeah. So I definitely think, one, I would definitely say, listen, and this kind of goes to food too. Like, it's not always going to be a party in your mouth. Like, my kids will say that when, I'll make them something for dinner that they don't like. And they're like, but I don't really like that. And I'm like, sorry, dude. It's like, you're going to have to eat things that you don't really like sometimes, and then we'll say things like, if you go over to Andy's house and they serve something you don't like, we want you to be able to eat that food. Like, it is rude to sit there and not eat what you are served. You don't have to lick your plate, But from our perspective, like if somebody's going to take the time to make you a meal, then you don't just take a little bite and say, I don't like it. Do you have mac and cheese? So we're teaching you that skill of it's not always going to be a party in your mouth. And life is not always going to be a party. And so if you sign up for something and then 3 weeks later, which this happens all the time with kids, right? They're like, I want to play guitar. And then you get them guitar lessons. And 2 weeks later, they come home and they're like, I hate guitar,
Right.
So I think from my perspective, like one, this ties into like, what are the values of your family? Right. So for example, like one of the values in our family is hard work, right? And integrity. And so integrity in this family means like you do what you say you're going to do. And so if you made a commitment to a team and this runs 4 weeks, you said you were going to do it when it started and we will complete it. And every time you go, it's not going to be a circus, but is there anything that you can pull when you're there? Like, is there anything that you can find that you enjoy about it when you're there? And to try and sort of like pull on that thread of like, what's the best thing that you can get out of this, but also to remind kids that like, sometimes it's just not going to be a party. And what value in this family do we live by? And therefore we're going to live by the same value in this particular exercise, activity, extracurricular, whatever it is.
Nice.
And then it's like, hey, when the commitment ends, like if I signed you up for 4 weeks and after 4 weeks, you're like, I don't want to do it next time. Okay. We don't sign you up again because, you fulfilled your commitment and now we're done. Right. But that to us is really, really important. And it ties back to values. Like we bring that up a lot in our family. Like, well, what's the value in our family? Right.
Love that.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. One of the things that you just said a moment ago, Arjun, about putting the A+ on the refrigerator as well as the C- just reminded me of a story I heard from Kobe Bryant, who's actually talking to podcaster Lewis Howes on his show. And he was talking about how one summer when he was like 11 years old, he didn't score for the entire summer. And it was just a bunk summer. He couldn't make a shot. And he came home after the end of the season and was crying. And his, dad, who had been to every game, asked him what's wrong. And, Kobe's saying, I'm so disappointed in myself. I didn't get a single basket. And his dad was like, I just want you to know, regardless of whether you score 0 points a game or 60 points a game, like I'm going to love you no matter what. And Kobe said that gave him, knowing that he could fail and still have that unconditional love in the backdrop, that gave him all the mental security he needed to, put everything he had into the game and really go for it. So I thought that was interesting, a really powerful story.
Yeah, I love that actually. And it reminds me of, we talk about failure in the book and we talk about failing forward, right?
Right.
And sort of the idea that like we not only want to let our kids fail, but we also want to like highlight sort of that failure in a way that allows them to continue to build forward. And this goes for the parents too. And I'll tell you both a story. So last year, I ran an ultramarathon.
Nice.
It was, well, hold on. It was the furthest I had ever run in a race was 13 miles for a Spartan. And I decided that I would do 50 miles. And the reason I decided it was because I knew that I could do a marathon. Like I knew that I could do that, but I really was unsure of whether or not I would be able to do 50 miles. Like I knew that would really push me in a way that a marathon would not push me. And I started training like August of, 2020. And the race was in April of this year. And we went to Utah. It was in Utah. I was in the Salt Flats. And we all went as a family. Obviously, my children had known that I'd been training for this race for, however long that was, 8 months? Because when you're training for that big of, an endurance race, I mean, sometimes you're gone for 3 hours. Like it's a big deal, right? And the race happens. They're there. The boys are there with my husband. They wave at the start. And then the only aid station that they could see me at was at the second to last aid station, which was mile 41.
Oh, wow.
I get to mile 41. I'm toast, like complete toast. And I say to my husband, like, I'm in tears, like the whole thing, for lots of different reasons. But I was like, I just don't know if I can keep going. He's like, well, sit down. We're going to get you water. We're going to get you food. Like my kids had like one of those like Theraguns, the percussive guns, and was like doing it on my back. And they're like, just get back out there and start and see if you can finish. I'm like, okay. So they get back in the car. I I go and I run about a mile. So I get to mile 42. And this is probably where we should leave our phones at home. I had my phone with me and I was like, I can't do it anymore. So I called my husband and I quit. And I was like, come pick me up. And he's like, okay. You know, he wasn't going to argue. He was just still, you know, okay. So they drive up. I'm on the side of the road. I'm not in tears, but I'm definitely in pain. And I lean into the car and I say, like, I can't do it. I just don't want to do it anymore. I just don't want to do it anymore. And my husband's like, okay. And I look back at the kids and my both of them are like kind of looking at me, and my youngest just goes, well, you did your best. And then my oldest, who was 10 at the time, starts to cry. And he's like, Mom, you have to do it. And I go, I know, buddy, but I don't want to do it. And he's like, I know, Mom, but you have to, like, you've been training and it's so important. And I was like, buddy, it's not that important. And he keeps crying. And I'm standing there and I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, I could keep going. Right. Or I could not keep going. And my lizard brain totally took over and was like, I'm just going to quit. So I get in the car and I quit. And as we're driving away, like way away, you know, like definitely I'm done with the race. I'm not going back. I did not finish and I quit. I'm thinking to myself, like, what did I teach my kid? Right. Because a lot of people will argue you taught your kid that you were a quitter. That's what you taught your kid. And I think, you know, listen, maybe in that moment, or maybe I taught my kid that you can fail and still be lovable. Right. And maybe I also taught my kid that you can work really hard at something. Like you can work so hard at something and you can still fail. Because how many times in life does that happen where we work our ASS's off and we still find ourselves not getting what we wanted? And so from my perspective, I think it's also really important as adults for us to talk about failure in that way with our children, and for us to be able to highlight to them those two specific things, that we can fail and still be lovable. Like, you love me, buddy, right? My kid would be like, of course I love you, Mom. And so I would in turn say, and I love you if this ever happens to you or when this happens to you, right? And then the other thing is, of course, like, you can work so hard for something, buddy, and it just not work out, right? You can train all year round and not score a single point or not make the team, you know, and that will happen too. But guess what? You're okay. And you're going to come back and you're going to, you know, get dressed the next day and you're going to put your clothes on and you're going to keep going to work or doing the things that you do, because that's life sometimes. So I think failure works both ways. Like, we want to allow our kids to fail, but I think as parents, we also want to be really intentional and reflective on the ways in which we've failed as well.
That's a powerful story. And you taught them curiosity, because the whole thing was like, can I get to 50 miles? I mean,
Totally.
You were curious. And so they may have picked up on that. And it goes back to the original point you said of when you were a child, you know, your curiosity really sparked a lot of this. And I think you taught curiosity to them in a way.
That's awesome. I've not thought of that, but I love that too. I definitely love that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. Well, I know we have about 10 minutes left. I really wanted to spend some time talking about LIGHFBOX. I mentioned it briefly in the intro. I'll pass it over to you, Dr. L, to maybe give our listeners a potted summary of what it is, and then we can kind of talk about how it works and what the outcomes might be.
Yeah. So LIGHFBOX, we have two products. LIGHFBOX is a company that really works to, like, grow your superpower of self-awareness and sort of to challenge you to learn more about yourself so that you can be really who you were meant to be and contribute in the way that you want to. So one is a box with 180 cards. Each card has an intention, which is sort of like the guide of the card, and then a prompt or a question. So a place to go with the card. And then we also have an app, which basically is a digitized version of this box with these cards. So you get a card every day delivered into the app. And then we also have courses and meditations to sort of highlight your curiosity. It goes to that word. I mean, it really speaks to that word curiosity, like in so many ways. Like, this is a box filled with curiosities and allows you challenging questions to begin to be curious about your own life and the way that you operate and how you think about yourself and what you believe about yourself. With, again, the goal of basically like growing the superpower of self-awareness.
That's super
cool. Is it designed to build on each other? Like, is the first card really supposed to be the first card, or can I just pick and choose here? I'm sure I'll get benefits either way, but.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is designed to go from 1 to 180, but you can still benefit if you just were to pick a random card. Like it doesn't necessarily piggyback off each other. Like 14 doesn't necessarily relate to 15 that then relates to 16. There are I think two sequences of cards where it does ask you to reflect on the previous card.
Got it.
But definitely you can benefit if you just pulled I used to do this actually when I had my podcast. I would, with a guest, I would pull a random card and ask them to provide their response to the question. So it definitely can work both ways.
Yeah, very cool. Are you going to pull a card, Arjun?
Well, I mean, at the end, I think Dr. L just set herself up. So
I know.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I haven't really seen something in that format. I like it's nice and clean and simple, and questions are the best place to start. How long did it take you to amass that many questions, that many thoughtful questions?
Yeah. So actually like far less time than you might imagine. Maybe actually this is where your word in the beginning, grind, actually happens. Like, I had been doing like 10 at a time, and I think I had only gotten to 30 or something. And then I went on a trip, and my husband was like, you have got to get them done by the time you get back, because we have to get them to print, because we were trying to get them finished by the holiday. And I was like, okay, I'll get them done. So I did 150 of them on like a 2-hour plane ride. I just went to town. But the way that I thought about it, like it really actually was not that hard, because all I thought about was, what do I ask my clients? Like when I'm sitting down with my clients, what am I curious about? What do I want to know? And so it just sort of flooded. And I am not kidding you that the 180th card was written right before the wheels touched down to where I was going. So I like just made the deadline. But yeah, I mean, it is. And I think that's too, when people look at the cards, like they should know that this is coming from a clinical place, in the sense that like I ask my clients these questions all the time to help them unlock awareness and knowledge and wisdom about themselves, so that they can make the changes that they want to.
Very cool. And the idea is journaling the answers, or just sort of.
Yeah, both. I mean, definitely for many of the cards, it will actually ask you like write down blah, 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 or, identify yada, yada. But I do think people, for example, like a couple of people who I know have used the cards, they just think about it first before they even like write down or provide a response. More than anything, and this sort of, just goes to the way therapy works too. Like, I'm far less invested in your answer than I am in your willingness to explore an answer. And so I think for anybody that's listening and interested in the box, like that's how I would encourage people to think about it. It's like, don't worry about what comes up for you. Just be interested in the process itself.
Oh my God, that is incredible, because I think that's a perfect segue to just kind of recapping this entire experience of reading your book and having this conversation, because it's not about the outcome, it's about the effort.
Yeah.
Right. That's something that you can teach your children in terms of like being more gritty. And again, I mean, I think that this book, 10 Rules for Resilience, should really be picked up by everyone, because what I love about it is at the end of each chapter, you guys went into like how to bring it home with like tangible examples of how to bring this into the family life. And it was really incredible to read. And it got me fired up. I got to say that. So that's really what I was thinking about. But if you don't mind, can I actually just share like the 8 ways to develop gritty kids that you had listed out in the last chapter?
Yeah.
So 1 is look for passion, then be patient. The next one is focus on effort, not the result. 3rd is build on failure. 4th is add stress in small doses. Discourage easy outs. Encourage kids to step outside the box. Teach optimism. And teach them to be 100% responsible for their outcomes. So if you get anything from this conversation, maybe it's just those, 8 little tidbits to help, develop more gritty kids at home.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Awesome. Well, I got one final question for you, but Arjun, you want to pull a card before I do that?
Yeah, this is great. Actually, this is a good one. This is a good one. Number 174, look deeper into your purpose. So the question is, what do you believe you were put on this planet to do?
Yes. What I'm doing right now, which is like creating space for people to change.
I love that. We'll definitely put your site and LIGHFBOX in our show notes, and your Instagram as well. Your Instagram is like a body of work in and of itself. You have a lot of great posts.
Thank you.
Yeah, no,
I'm quite verbose. I will say that, like, when I get going, it's hard for me to be quiet.
No, I like it. You make use of the image and the description on the right-hand side. Like there's like mini essays, in those posts. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one final question we ask all our guests: if you could be any animal for a day, Dr. L, what would it be and why?
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. So I think I would. Well, does a bird count?
Yeah,
Birds count.
Okay.
sure.
I would probably be a hawk because
Nice.
right now, I'm a runner still. That did not stop. And so, 5-6 days out of the week, I go run around these ponds. It's very close to my house. And there's always hawks, sometimes eagles. And I always think to myself, like, what do they see? Like, how cool would that be? So I think I would love that. I would really love that. And to fly. I mean,
Totally.
to fly would just be magnificent, which is very odd because I don't like being in planes, but I would love to be able to fly myself.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Do you like roller coasters?
I love roller coasters.
I imagine it'd be the same. You're high, you gotta get that weightless feeling. You're just soaring through the
Totally.
air.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
roller coasters, but planes are not my jam.
I know it's tough. Well, you got any flights coming up, or are you staying local for the time being?
I'm landlocked for right now. Joe and I have actually been working on another project at his farm, and I was supposed to actually be there today, but we had to shift our shoot schedule a little bit. So I'm landlocked for now. I might be going there in January. I'll be in the West Coast in January. I'm going to LA for a day. So yeah, for now it's just enjoying the family, enjoying the holiday times, which I love. So yeah.
Nice.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Amazing. Well, I hope you have a great holiday season with amazing memories with your family. And I know I pulled a lot from this conversation, and I really do sincerely thank you for this contribution. It changed my life reading the book.
Oh my gosh. Well, I just have to say, you both are so attentive and effortful in an interview. And I really appreciate that as somebody who has been on podcasts before, and also been a host myself and tries deeply to ask questions that maybe others haven't asked, or to go to places where maybe others haven't gone, or to be curious about things maybe other people aren't curious about. You guys are those people. And I really appreciate that, because that curiosity and intentionality and effort does create space for a welcoming investment in inquiry. And I'm so grateful for both of you for this hour.
Wow.
You're making me blush.
Yeah, seriously.
Thank you. Thank you
so much. We really do appreciate that, Dr. L.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, it was a fun hour. We learned a lot. Have a great holiday season. Hopefully we'll be doing this again at some time in the future. It was really fun.
No, I appreciate it. You guys are fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for the support.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can sign up for the Rising Weekly newsletter sent out each week.
Every Friday, we expand on the episode with insights, recommendations, and more.
You can sign up at risinglaterally.com.
Thank you.